Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. This week, we're going to be exploring bands or projects that are entirely composed, crafted, possibly even engineered by a single person. We're calling this one-person projects. We're going to start off with a band. It's kind of weird to call it that, knowing there's only one person involved, called Mount Eerie. We're going to be looking at a track called The Place I Live off of their album Clear Moon. Let's dive into this and see what they're bringing to the table.
If I look or if I don't look, clouds are always passing over. Place I place I live, passing under my feet.
Minimal in a lot of ways, but quite rich in others.
I see you fall.
Huh. So here's here's the thing. Like, I don't think this was too confusing for me to break down. I think I'll be able to touch on a lot of the aspects that are utilized to craft this song in the moment to moment, but I have a real tough time placing the emotion of it, and it's because it fluctuates based on the instrument, which is fascinating. It ends up making something quite complex regarding the emotional resonance, and kind of obscures it a little bit. Like, is it dreary? Is it melancholic? Is it bright and hopeful? Is it eerie? I took that name from the project title, but it does have some very haunting vibes to it at times. Not just atmospherically, but also chords that are utilized. It goes through a lot of elements, sometimes simultaneously too, which just creates a very complex emotional landscape for this track, which, I mean, if I were to extrapolate right now with no lyrics and look entirely on the title, the place where you live is filled with a lot of things. Not necessarily physical things, but memories, events, emotions. It's not going to be something that is simple to incorporate into an artwork. But we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves. We'll touch on all that when we hit the lyrics. What is going on in the music? And that's what we're going to talk about now. We start out with a single instrument. I thought this was beautiful. Okay, so here's another really cool thing. We might be able to tie this into, well, everything I just talked about and possibly the lyrics. The song continues to grow and expand. It's a simple single idea. We have a rhythmic pulse, we have a single note. The note changes sometimes, but it's not a very frequent change. It's rather static. Eventually, we get another synth pad on top of it. Get some nice harmonies going. A drum kit comes in, hi-hat on every quarter note, and an occasional snare hit. Interesting about the snare is I don't know what it does. The kit itself sounded like it was shifting from left to right in the first 2 minutes or so. But I think it was only the hi-hat that was shifting. The snare was rising and falling in volume, almost fading in and out of the song. Eventually, the snare came back, though. It was not as pronounced as the loudest it had been in that opening bit, and it was accompanied by these hand drums that were off to the right. And in between these points, though, we continued to add more and more elements. We added vocals to this. We had a full chorded synth idea, which sat on top of this single line concept that's been there since the very beginning. That's our foundation. That word is important. We'll come back to it. We add the male vocals. We eventually add a plethora of female vocals. And that's the song. It's about stacking all these layers and crafting new combinations of timbres and introducing more complexity to the harmonic work, the chords themselves. And none of it is cyclical. Rhythmically, a lot of this is cyclical. The hi-hat doing the quarter notes. The synth pads primarily working with whole notes and tied whole notes, and tying notes is just a way to combine lengths. So in 4/4, a whole note is 4 beats, and say perhaps a half note, which is 2 beats. You would put a little string underneath or over them to show that they're tied together, and now you have a 6-beat sound. There were a few times when we would hold a note out for 3 and even 4 bars long. So this would be 3 or 4 whole notes tied together, no breaks. Again, leaning into this idea of static, of simplicity, of rigidness as a foundation. Everything is kind of built on top of that. And but what I was saying though was linear but cyclical. So we have these moments, right? Maybe they're just whole notes. Maybe it's a long held out note. It's the quarter notes in the drums. It's the melodic looping that we get in the vocal line. Specifically, the male vocal line seems to have a riff that it does, a lick, an ostinato, a repeated melodic idea. The words are different, but the notes and the rhythm are the same. Um, but the chords that underline everything are not cyclical. We do have these elements of cycles, but the song itself, I believe, if you look at the journey that the chords take us through, is linear. And I really like this. It creates a song that simultaneously feels familiar from moment to moment, but is always taking us around new corners. We don't ever quite know where we're going to next. We have a general idea of what it's going to sound like, but we don't know what emotion it's going to be, what kind of chords we're going to get, what our note relationships will be. And I find that fascinating, even more so once we introduce more melody lines. We don't really have a lot of melody lines outside of the vocals. I think there was one synth line that we had for a little bit that provided something that wasn't purely chordal based, wasn't about holding a note out. But it wasn't a primary focus, and I don't think we stuck around with it very long. Our main melodic ideas come from our vocals, and we have our male vocalist that we get introduced to first and stick around with for a while. And then we have our female vocalist who comes in by themselves originally, and then in delayed groups after that. And I'm really curious what's going on here with the lyrics. Because it starts out where we have just pure harmony between our male and female, and then we have counterpoint between our male and female. They have different perspectives now rather than being in unison. And then we have our male vocalist surrounded, one center, one to the left, one to the right, of female vocals, all doing their own 3 different things, starting at different times, usually about a beat or 2 beats behind each other, creating an idea of what, if they were playing the same thing, would be a canon. But in this instance is not, it's just delayed counterpoint. And it becomes quite a complex track to keep everything under wraps as far as critical listening, trying to listen into what everything's doing. Your chord progression is changing in ways that it hasn't before. You have to keep paying attention to that. The lyrics are changing. I don't pick up lyrics on a first time, so that is not as important to me, but it is something that is contrasting moment to moment. And then we have 3 other melody lines all doing their own things, running counterpoint not just against themselves, but against our original primary melody line from our male vocal. And of course, they all have their own lyrics as well. Not something I can pay attention to, but something to note. There is so much going on in the last minute, 2 minutes of this track that it's really fascinating how it all comes together in a way that I think is beautifully cohesive, even on a palatability scale. I think even if you have specific flavors of a specific palate, a taste for music that's on the simpler side of the spectrum, you're still going to find this beautiful in some capacity. But it is incredibly deep. There's so many moving parts going on at one time, not to mention the emotional aspect, which is just all over the place. The male vocalist seems to have a sense of bittersweetness to it. There's a brightness in the notes, but the tone is weary from the start. The tone is weird. It's always this really comfortable speaking range as far as pitch goes. Energy's a bit low, and there's a bit of a slur or a drawl to it that kind of makes everything feel like it's drawn out. It takes so much energy for this vocalist to say the smallest things, and it just comes off as very world worn, very beaten down. Um, and like I said, it's a bittersweetness to that. Maybe a bit of wistfulness. Um, Possibly getting what they wanted and still wanting something else or wishing they had done something else, right? That sort of mixed feeling there. I got what I wanted. I should be happy, but I still don't have everything I want. There's still something else, right? That kind of idea. And when you mix that with the overall brightness in timbre of the other vocalist and the mixed bag of emotions we get from there, there's certainly some that I feel are a bit brighter, certainly moving more towards a major vibe, but there's also some melancholy in there as well and a little bit of haunting. There's some eeriness in the vocals as well, and I'm curious if I went back and listened, I would be paying attention to specific emotional resonances of each of the vocals. It's very possible that each of the three vocals are representing a specific flair, and maybe I'm not hearing a jumbled up idea of emotions, but each one of them is presenting their own and they're consistent from section to section. That's a possibility. Like I said, something I would have to dig into on another listen. But they are representing multiple facets of emotion. And then you run this against the music. A lot of this music exists, as far as I'm concerned. It's not necessarily leaning in one way or another. It's uh, what's the term? Emotionally neutral, and that makes it really interesting when emotions do stand out. We have these more powerful, positive emotions that come out of it. I'm not going to necessarily say joy, but something on the happier side. Maybe a sort of victory. Um, Maybe a moment of triumph or accomplishment, an achievement, or some sort of pride in finishing, accomplishing something. Again, not joy, but definitely something above neutral. And other times we can dip below that as well. There's some very melancholic vibes in here. The whole thing isn't exactly neutral. There's a lot of neutrality in it, but I think there's also pensiveness. It's a very thoughtful song. But there are some chords that pop up here and there, maybe like four or five across the entire 6 minute track, that really lead into a haunting sound. And it's really interesting to kind of be flowing with this. You're like, okay, we're deep in thought. That one wasn't a great one. That's a bit better. And then this tension just comes on and it tries to give you a shiver down your spine. You're like, where did that come from? And then you just don't hear it again for a while. Maybe you kind of forget about it. A minute and a half later, it gets you again. It's really interesting. It almost feels like a ghost haunting the song. I'm curious where this all goes. I'm uh I'm gonna hit the lyrics here. We'll see what's going on there, and then I'll wrap this up. So I don't have a real strong grasp on this one, but it does feel like attempting to understand. I feel like I'm attempting to understand the song. It feels like attempting to understand the world around you. I kind of had a very different vibe of this previously, and I did mention to keep the word foundation in your mind. I was kind of hoping the lyrics were going to take me in a direction of a song about a home. And it is just, much larger scale than I was expecting. I was thinking of a structure, a house. And the song was going to the song explored several emotions because the house holds all those emotions, the memories. The longer you're in a house, the more complex the memories get. And that was going to be the idea of the song. There's, the foundational layer, which was simple when we started, and as we lived there longer, the emotions grew more complex, and possibly the house became haunted with events that transpired. The foundation of the song was also the foundation of the house. It's the ground level that everything is built on. I think some of this can still be extrapolated to what the lyrics are about, but not as easily or not as wholesale as my original idea. This seems to be trying to understand where you live, not specifically in your house or your region or your country, but larger than that. We live on planet Earth. At least I assume so. I don't know if intergalactic species watch Earthling YouTube, but if you do, hello. Uh, Welcome from Earth. I hope you're enjoying the videos. Come by and visit sometime. Um, it says interesting is the apathy of where we live, of Earth. And I think this is really interesting because it solidifies, or I should say supports my argument that the song has a neutral color to it as far as the emotional resonance goes. The song doesn't care what you get out of it. It is primarily neutral, as the world doesn't care how you engage with it. We open up the song, and it is probably the only repeated element of the whole set of lyrics. If I look, or if I don't look, clouds are always passing over in the place I live. It doesn't matter if you observe the earth, it continues to rotate and do its thing. Precipitation occurs, water is pulled from the ocean, put into the clouds so it can rain. You don't have to see any of this for it to still happen. We are so infinitesimally small compared to the planet that our observance of it has absolutely no impact on the planet itself. I end up feeling overwhelmingly small when I say that. And I think that's the point of it. The song mentions how the narrator enters into a fog as their mind wanders. I haven't quite figured out if it's a mental fog or a physical fog, but interestingly says that he ends up on a ridge and he sees through a hole in the fog and he says to himself, "Behold," but sees nothing. What is there is rocks and water and wood, and they don't speak to him. And by this point, we're at the halfway mark of the lyrics, and we're about to begin to reiterate some lines. It's interesting, it says that the rocks, the water, the wood, the planet is slow and uneasy and alive. Once again, such large of a being that it doesn't even notice us, the ants on it. says, "The clouds pass over the landscape. A blanket on stone, land waves are rolling momentarily. I come out from under." And that makes me think it was a mental fog, part of the mind wandering. And it really is about trying to observe something that is so much larger. Not even just observe, but to understand that which is so much larger than you. We can read about the earth, we can memorize facts about the earth, how large it is, how many species are on it, the numbers of plants, the numbers of oceans, and the longest rivers, and stuff like this. And it doesn't really compared to the vastness of it all when you actually try to think about just what this planet is, how large it actually is. This is something that I think only astronauts might be able to comprehend, is actually seeing the Earth from the outside in and actually being able to view the planet and see just how large it is. It's an impossible job, even having a hole to peer through the fog, you still can't comprehend it. And I think that's where a lot of the emotional parts of the track come through. There are little victories, little moments of celebration as you learn more and more about the planet. And there could even be some sorrow as you learn about some of the things that is happening to it. But every once in a while, you really put it into perspective and you realize just how uncaring and large it can be to its inhabitants. And that's that wave of dread that comes through every once in a while. Could just be a rogue thought. 1 out of 7 billion, and yet there's still so much of the planet that's unexplored. 8 billion now, isn't it? I think we passed 8 billion last year. Interesting track. Those are my thoughts. Mount Erie's the place I live. What'd you think? Anything that stood out to you? Anything you'd like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Let me know down in the comments. Above the comment section is a description box, and there's a link for Linktree. It takes you to this menu right here. It has links for everything related to the channel. You can find my music, ways to support the channel, link to the Discord server, and so much more. Go ahead and check it out. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three. We have a special selection today. Otherwise, we'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 p.m. UTC, as always. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.